All right, welcome back, guys. Today we are going over Seneca's letter to Lucilius, letter 57. This one's a fairly short one, but there are some really hidden gems in here, I think. So this letter is called On the Trials of Travel, and he says here in verse 1, when it was time for me to return from Naples to Baiae, I easily persuaded myself that a storm was raging, that I might avoid another trip by sea, and yet the road was so deep in mud all the way that I may be thought none the less to have made a voyage. On that day, I had to endure the full fate of an athlete. The anointing with which we began was followed by the sand sprinkle in the Naples tunnel. Okay, so he's talking about his travel, right? He's traveling from Naples to Baiae, kind of, from one place to a luxury place. So it's a little bit hard to be empathetic with this, but you'll see some of kind of a little bit of Seneca's, I don't know, weakness here, you might say. But let's go on. He says in verse 2, no place could be longer than that prison. Nothing could be dimmer than those torches, which enabled us not to see amid darkness, but to see the darkness. But even supposing that there was light in the place, the dust, which is an oppressive and disagreeable thing even in the open air, would destroy the light. How much worse the dust is there, where it rolls back upon itself and, being shut in without ventilation, blows back in the faces of those who set it going. So we endured two inconveniences at the same time, and they were diametrically different. We struggled both with mud and with dust on the same road on the same day. So again, he's saying on this trip from Naples to Baiae, he went through this tunnel, he went through the mud. He obviously describes in detail how bad it is. This tunnel is very dark, it's very dusty, right? So these are things that necessarily you wouldn't expect Seneca to say. It's kind of interesting. I was a little bit taken aback by his complaining, to be honest with you. In verse 3, he says, the gloom, however, furnished me with some food for thought. I felt a certain mental thrill and a transformation unaccompanied by fear due to the novelty and the unpleasantness of an unusual occurrence. Of course, I'm not speaking to you of myself at this point, because I am far from being a perfect person or even a man of middling qualities. I refer to one over whom fortune has lost her control. Even such a man's mind will be smitten with a thrill, and he will change color. Okay, so this is a little bit interesting here. So what is he saying? Well, he's saying that at first he says, it gave me some food for thought, right? I was thinking about this, and I realized that this is, this hardship I'm going through, right? There's a certain mental thrill to this and transformation, like this novelty, this unpleasantness actually inspires us with me. But then he said, oh, wait a minute, actually, I'm not talking about myself, of course, because I'm not that guy. And said, I'm talking about someone who's actually done what we're striving to do, where fortune has lost her control, right? That man, he will be smitten with thrill and will change color. Like, even the hardships that he's going through are going to be in some way exciting to him. And it's interesting to question whether or not Seneca is actually talking about himself, even though he says, is he being humble here? And I think to a degree he is, because he's aware of these things. Otherwise he wouldn't say these things. And so even though, you hear him complaining, I think he's setting the stage to say that, yeah, these things, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to happen that you can't control, and they're going to be bad, objectively bad. However, it still can be good. It can still be good. Like, you can still find the good in it if you truly are stoic in nature. So let's go on. He says in verse 4, for there are certain emotions, my dear Lucilius, which no courage can avoid. Nature reminds courage how perishable a thing it is. And so he will contract his brow when the prospect is forbidding, will shudder at sudden apparitions, and will become dizzy when he stands at the edge of a high precipice and looks down. This is not fear. It's a natural feeling which reason cannot rout. So he's saying here that there's actually certain things, certain reactions that we have as humans, all right, that it doesn't matter how courageous you are, you're still going to experience these things, right? He says nature reminds us how courage, how perishable a thing it is, all right? And so he's saying that, for example, at certain sudden apparitions, like seeing a ghost, you're going to shudder at those. You become dizzy if you stand at the edge of a high precipice and look down. So the fear of heights is not something. I mean, you can have courage, but you're still going to experience those feelings. And I think that perhaps he might be somewhat wrong in this, in the sense that I do think that people that, for example, work on telephone lines or climb up very high heights, that they get so used to it that they no longer experience that. But I think what he's saying is that essentially there's courage, which is overcoming fear, but then there's these like natural base things that you're still going to feel, right? Especially if it's your first time being exposed to them. All right. So he says here in verse 5, that is why certain brave men, most willing to shed their own blood, cannot bear to see the blood of others. Some persons collapse and faint at the sight of a freshly inflicted wound. Others are affected similarly on handling or viewing an old wound which is festering, and others meet the sword stroke more readily than they see it dealt. So this is kind of interesting as well. I mean, he's saying that there's some people that would go and go into battle and aren't afraid to die and aren't afraid to be struck by the sword, but if they see blood, they're going to faint. That's pretty interesting. I suppose that's true, but it is an interesting thing to think about. All right. Accordingly, as I said, I experienced a certain transformation, though it could not be called confusion. Then, at the first glimpse of restored daylight, my good spirits returned without forethought or command, and I began to muse and think how foolish we are to fear certain objects to a greater or lesser degree, since all of them end the same way. For what difference does it make whether a watchtower or a mountain crashes down upon us? No difference at all, you will find. Nevertheless, there will be some men who fear the latter mishap to a greater degree, though both accidents are equally deadly. So true it is that fear looks not to the effect, but to the cause of the effect. So this is interesting as well. So what he's saying here is he's saying once he got out of this tunnel and he was in better spirits, better conditions, he thought about this and he's like, it's weird how we fear certain things, right? It's like, does it really matter if a watchtower falls on you or a mountain? But more people will be afraid of the mountain. Why? They're equally deadly, but what it turns out is that we don't fear the actual thing. We fear the cause of the thing, right? So when you think about the things that could happen to you and the ways that you could die, it's the actual cause of the thing. It's not the actual thing itself. That would explain why also a lot of people will do things that are bad habits that will cause them to die prematurely, but they don't really fear that, but they would fear being attacked and stabbed to death or falling to their death or a lot of other things that could go wrong. In verse 7, he says, do you suppose that I am now referring to the Stoics, who hold that the soul of a man crushed by a great weight cannot abide and is scattered forthwith because it has not had a free opportunity to depart? That is not what I am doing. Those who think thus are, in my opinion, wrong. So he's saying, are you thinking that I'm talking about the guys that say, if you die in this certain way, then your soul will dissipate, like it'll be destroyed? No, those guys are wrong. He's like, I don't believe that. That's kind of ridiculous. It's not true. All right. He says here in verse 8, just as fire cannot be crushed out, since it will escape round edges of the body, which overwhelms it, just as the air cannot be damaged by lashes and blows, or even cut into, but flows back about the object to which it gives place. Similarly, the soul, which consists of the subtlest particles, cannot be arrested or destroyed inside the body, but by virtue of its delicate substance, it will rather escape through the very object by which it is being crushed. Just as lightning, no matter how widely it strikes and flashes, makes its return through a narrow opening, so the soul, which is still subtler than fire, has a way of escaping through any part of the body. Okay, so what he's saying here is he's saying that it's untrue. If you die, your soul can escape your body, right? Just, he's comparing it to other kind of ethereal type of things, right? So, and it's debatable here. Again, what is he, is he trying to say that he's saying that we do have a soul and that soul lives on? It seems in many ways that is what Seneca is saying, but let's move on. And then in verse 9, he says, we therefore come to this question, whether the soul can be immortal. But be sure of this, if the soul survives the body after the body is crushed, the soul can in no wise be crushed out. I think it's supposed to be in no ways, but maybe it's wise. The soul in no wise can be crushed out, precisely because it does not perish. For the rule of immorality immortality never admits of exceptions, and nothing can harm that which is everlasting farewell. So what he's saying here is he's saying that, look, here's the question: is the soul immortal? Okay, well, we're not really going to answer that question, but you can be sure of this. Okay, if the soul does survive the body after the body is destroyed, then it can't be crushed in any way. There's no way for it to die, right? That is what immortality means. He's saying so you don't really have to worry about this. So this letter is kind of interesting. It's in my opinion, there's a couple of points to take from this. One is that things are going to be hard, and there's going to be some things that are going to be so hard that it doesn't matter how good you are or courageous you are, they're still going to be hard for you. But that doesn't mean that you can't still accept and not fight those things, that you suddenly have to now give yourself over to fate, right? Just because if you have an uncontrollable fear of a thing, like standing over the edge of a precipice, as you said, that does not mean that you cannot be stoic, that you cannot still even allow those experiences to be and allow what is happening to be, right? And the other point that he makes is that it's interesting that the things that we fear, right? And a lot of times we fear the actual cause, the cause, but not the actual effect as much, right? It produces the same effect. So if you think about the way in which you fear things, it can be useful to think about how sometimes you're just fearing the cause of the thing and not the actual thing itself, right? So, for example, I coach a lot of guys on dating and women, and how many guys are afraid of rejection, but are they afraid of but they're afraid of the rejection if it comes from a very attractive girl. They'd be more afraid to talk to an attractive girl. Why? Because it's the cause of the thing, right? Which is silly, because the effect is not even much. Who cares if you get rejected? It's not going to physically harm you. But we're afraid of the cause of the thing. And so I think just knowing that can help you to eliminate the fear of the cause of the thing, realizing that's ridiculous. Well, that's it for this week. We'll see you next time. Take care.